Hey, Sean, I see you there. Hello, everyone. Just going to wait a little bit. Also, that light is not nearly as bright as I expected. So, let's see if that makes it any better. Just wait and see if anybody comes on the live stream. Wait a little bit. Just see. All right. Well, I mean, to anyone on here, there's probably a good chance that you guys already know. But yesterday, there's a 6-part mini series of lectures that's on the Word on Fire Institute YouTube channel covering Vatican II. It started yesterday. Each episode will air there'll be one episode to air each Tuesday. So yesterday was the first one. So just wanted to point people to that. I put a link to the first video in the description to this live stream in case anyone wants to check it out. So that's basically the big announcement, which for some of you might not be that big since you probably already knew. But I figured I should come on here and just point people to this. And just so people are aware, so this YouTube channel that you're on right now is my own. It's not affiliated with my job, my employer, or anything like that. So just to be clear, there's a distinction between my channel and any work I do elsewhere. So just want to make that clear up front. But I thought I would just make this announcement in case people wanted to check out that first lecture. And then the second lecture will air next Tuesday, this upcoming Tuesday. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. And thanks, Sean, for your kind words about it. I hope it goes well. I'm excited for it. It's a little bit different approach to Vatican II than I've done in the past, but it's one that I hope will help answer some questions people have. It's not delving into every topic on Vatican II, but I structured it primarily to help provide a bigger, more holistic view within which to understand other individual aspects of the council. So, is this my first lecture series with Word on Fire? Well, I have to think about that. It's definitely the first one I've done that's on the YouTube channel. I've recorded other stuff as well, but those, I guess those weren't series. So I've done other lectures and stuff. But I did do the series of videos on Dei Verbum, the Dei Verbum reading challenge. And then, so that I think is still available for those who are Institute members. So I don't know if you're a member of the Institute, I believe you can still get access to that. Yes, the first video basically is just what is Vatican II, just helping people get a better idea of what an ecumenical council is and what give more of a historical and theological context and cultural context to the council, as well as give some background to John the 23rd, who is the one that called the council. Provide some background information to that. So that, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the announcement. Is just that it started airing yesterday, and every Tuesday a new episode will release for 6 consecutive Tuesdays. So that's, looking forward to it. I hope people find it beneficial. Please, watch it, subscribe to the Word on Fire Institute channel, and send other people to it as well, that might find it helpful. Yes, they're all already recorded. So they're all done. It's just a matter of releasing them. Yeah. So yeah, other than that, I'm open to any random topics or Q&As or anything that people might have. So I'll check the chat, see if there's anything. Oh, apparently I don't have the full chat on my screen. Oops, let me go back and check and see if I missed anything. Oh, okay, so Mining Life LLC is Daniel. I think, okay. I'm assuming I know which Daniel that is. I do know a few of them, but I'm assuming I know which one you are. Bonaventure's understanding of nature and supernature. All right, yeah, I'll try to say a little bit about that in a minute. No, I don't really think much about cryptocurrency. Okay, yeah, I thought it was Diaz. Okay. Sean, to answer your question, that was so they have a whole production team. So they came up with all of that, which I thought they did a phenomenal job, to be honest. I was pretty impressed with how they did it. So it wasn't, I came up with the actual lectures, but the the production I have nothing to do with as far as that. So all credit goes to them for all of that aspect of it. Is it still frozen? Seems to be working on my end. So Bonaventure's understanding of nature and supernature. It's not an area that I know that much about, but it did come through in my dissertation. There was a section in Ratzinger's original Habilitationsschrift where he talks about it. So one of the important aspects in Ratzinger's presentation of Bonaventure, at least, is the idea that when it says the axiom that grace presupposes nature is basically stating grace's ontological status, and what it's really trying to show is that grace is not a second nature that's super added to nature. It is something done to a pre-existent nature. It's gratia presupponit naturam. Grace presupposes nature, but yes, sometimes you'll see it also builds on. But he thinks that the adage is important because it avoids the idea that grace is somehow a second nature, that it's not a second nature. It is something done to a pre-existent nature. And so at least Ratzinger's interpretation of Bonaventure is that you don't understand grace as a thing that you possess, like this packet that you have that's been given to you. He more understands it dynamically as a relation. So it's a constant influx of union with God. And so in that sense, the example I give, this is my own example. It's just how I understand Ratzinger's interpretation, is I compare it to electrical appliances. So grace is not like this, like box with ribbon on it that's been handed to you and you hold. It's more like an electrical appliance that needs a constant influx of electricity from outside to function, so that it's not something that you ever just statically possess. It's something that flows through you constantly. And so for him, it's a very dynamic thing. And so he doesn't want it to be reified and made into a thing. It's primarily a relation, a graced union with God. So it's a sharing in divine life, which requires a constant connection and relationship. It's not a one-time thing that you're given and now you have it. So that's partly how he views them. Ratzinger seems to prefer the Lubacian understanding of nature and grace in that sense. But in reading for that, I don't remember him going into a lot of the details that like de Lubac or the Neo-Thomists would. So I haven't, even if he did, I just don't remember that. He just kind of touches on it briefly as part of a larger question about theology of divine revelation. I don't know if he can add to it. I would like to see a study of Bonaventure's perspective on this. If someone's written on it, I just haven't seen it. I've considered researching that question myself. I certainly think Ratzinger has parts of his theology that could contribute, but not on the technical level of the debate. I haven't really seen him engage that question very like in a detailed fashion. So it'd be more sort of like the overall vision that he has, which again, so that relates to another aspect of the whole nature grace debate, is that following Bonaventure, Ratzinger he really sees nature and the supernatural, or nature and grace, as two movements in one overarching divine plan. So nature is creation as it's proceeding forth from God, and grace is the return. So it's that medieval notion of the exitus reditus, the flowing forth from God and then the returning back to God. And so he kind of sees them as two, it's a circular movement that are part of one plan. Like the creation, which is the natural procession, not the natural procession in the sense of like the procession of the sun, but the creation of nature is done for the sake of the union. And so that's he sees them tied together. And I think he definitely favors de Lubac on this, because I think the main point for them is that the whole reason the telos, I mean, if we're going to take metaphysics seriously, as any Thomist should, the telos, the final end of a thing, is part of what makes the thing what it is. So you can't really separate the essence or nature of something from its reason for existing, the reason it was created or made. So anything we can say about human nature is really done so that man can be united with God. That's the purpose of it. And so they're allergic to any attempts to try to make nature completely separable from that fact, because then de facto you're missing something important about what nature is. Like de facto what nature is. So trying to prescind from the question of salvation and grace actually loses something about nature. So that you just can't separate those two things. So for instance, so for Ratzinger, you can't separate creation from eschatology. Eschatology is part of creation insofar as it's the reason that creation happened. And so, again, the different doctrines of the faith are all united, which is also my answer to Sean's question as to who's my favorite theologian and why is it Ratzinger? Because I think he completely, he, he doesn't always make the connections explicitly himself, but I think the pieces are there. But it's the whole vision. He sees theology as a whole, plus his method. I think his method is good. It's more receptive and humble. He's not trying to create a system. He's just opening himself up to the breadth and depth of the tradition, trying to understand it and then convey it. And that's why I think he's just absolutely brilliant. I'm interested in the explanation power ecclesiology can have on Mariology. Any thoughts? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Mariology and ecclesiology for Ratzinger definitely go hand in hand. He co-wrote that book with von Balthasar, and by co-wrote, they each wrote half of the book. It's called Mary, the Church at the Source or something. Mary, the Church at the Source, something like that. And he definitely sees Mary as a figure, an archetype of the church, especially in its receptive quality. Yeah. No, exactly. He links ecclesiology and Mariology closely together. That's why he has another book called Daughter Zion, where he basically says that Mary is the embodiment of the people Israel. She is like in whom all of the hopes of the people Israel are begin to be fulfilled through her son. So yeah, the Mariology and ecclesiology are very much the same. Now, I would take it a step further and say that for Ratzinger, ecclesiology and Mariology are both themselves aspects of Christology. So in some sense, I'd say Christology is the central idea. So I would say that Trinitarian theology is the foundation, it's the beginning and the end of his theology, and Christology is the center. And that keeps everything together. Because going back to the notion of the exitus reditus, he sees Christ as the center of salvation history because he is the highest instance of creation, right? Insofar as he has taken on full, perfect human nature. And as such, he's also the beginning of the return. So he's the apex of nature and the beginning, the starting point for the return. So I would say, in general, the Trinity is the key to his entire theology. What do I want to study next on my free time or professionally? It's a good question. I have a number of things I'd like to study. Yes, this is Ratzinger. I would like to get back into the nature grace debate more. It's just a question of whether or not academically there's enough of a desire for it, because I get questions about it pretty regularly, but a lot of academics are sort of like, okay, we need to stop. Like, it's just enough's enough. Like, it's not getting anywhere. It's the same debate being had repeatedly. Can we just move on and not call each other heretics and let bygones be bygones? But personally, I just find the question fascinating. So for me, it's not even a matter of wanting to win a debate. It's wanting to come to a deeper understanding of the subject. And I just think nature and grace is extremely fascinating. So I'd like to study that. I'd also like to delve more into soteriology. It was one of my main areas of interest when I was an undergrad, and I just haven't. I took a doctoral seminar course on Aquinas on the Incarnation and Passion, but I'd really like to, at some point, do a whole survey of soteriology. My good friend Chris Plants is really into that as well, and he's helped reignite my interest in soteriology. So theology of salvation, meaning the saving work of Christ. So, and I recently read that book that I recommended by Margaret Turek on this, and I thought it was a good book, but there's still other questions in my head that aren't quite answered. I gave the sales pitch on the lecture series at the beginning, but that was like 20 minutes ago, so that's probably why you didn't notice it. As far as talking about the SSPX, I already did a video on that a long time ago that's on my channel. In brief, I can't stand them, even though I go to the traditional Latin Mass almost every week. Yeah, I know you were kidding, but just for other people, I can't. I've never been able to stomach them because to me, the corruption of the greatest is the worst. So you're taking that which in its essence is the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and you're portraying it as the epitome of orthodoxy and Catholicity while you're actually in schism and not in union with the church. So to me, I can't, it makes me sick, literally. So to me, it's a great deception. So yeah. I'm lucky. I have a TLM at my diocesan parish. They've been doing it for like 20 years. So it's not even connected with the motu proprio of Benedict. All right, let me go back. Daniel, in what areas of soteriology? Well, one, I've always somewhat had a soft spot in my heart for St. Athanasius because I think he has a very ontological view of Christ's saving work, so that he really, I think, helps understand why the incarnation itself is salvific. But then the cross itself, the sacrifice of the cross, and how is that saving? I'd like to delve into that more. I think because trying to figure out differences between, like, you have Anselm and Aquinas and like Ratzinger, and there's some nuances there that I would like to delve into more. I think it's an interesting topic, as well as my friend Chris Plants opened me up to the idea that, you know, we may be giving the earlier, before Anselm, there was a particular notion of soteriology and what we're being redeemed from that was sort of like, just ended up, people didn't like it anymore. So Anselm gave a different perspective, and he thinks maybe we need to go back and reconsider the Father's perspective. So I'd like to study the patristic understanding of soteriology. Any interest in Bernard Lonergan Insight? You know what? I've never read his book Insight, but I did find his book Method in Theology to be very interesting. I never quite remember all the specific details, but I liked the way, even if I wouldn't necessarily lump all of the 8 functional specialties within theology the exact same way he did, I thought it was a very interesting approach, and it's built on his understanding of insight. So talking about, he has like these 4 levels of knowledge, for instance, and the way he explains that to me has actually had a profound effect, especially since I think he's right. You have the level of data, and then you have the level of the intellect or the understanding, which is sort of the aha moment where you see a pattern in the data. And that's where I think most people stop. And I think he challenges us to consider that, no, there's another level, which is the rational level, where you put your insight to the test. You don't just stop and assume that your aha is correct. You now have to like go through a process of challenging yourself and testing it. And then the final step is making a judgment, but only after you've subjected your insight or understanding to rational evaluation. And I think most people skip the rational and go right from insight to judgment. which is affirming their insight. Now, to be honest, no, when it comes to soteriology, strictly Catholic soteriology is what I'm interested in. So let's see. This book on how TTE resurrection saves. This was in my volume. Just bought it. I'll have to look into that book on resurrection. Matter of fact, that's one aspect of my book I have to see if I can add to. Like, I don't even talk about it. Well, I talk about it, but I don't really go into the resurrection that much. And it just dawned on me. I'm like, man, I probably need to do that. Jack, I have to disagree with you about SSPX not being in schism according to Rome. You might have certain people in Rome that have given their opinion that they're not, but when I look at, and I did do some studies in canon law, they meet the definition of schism. So, and I think Cardinal Burke who was the head of the highest tribunal in Rome, the canon law tribunal. That's his own judgment that no, they are in schism, and there's really no way around it. If you look at the legal definition, they've matched the legal definition. So, so that's just it. Yeah. So, I found Lonergan's method and insight helpful, certainly in his call to testing the insight, invitation to birth collection. Yeah, I agree, Rachel. I don't know much about Lonergan, to be honest. I had a professor, Father Matthew Lamb, who was really big into him, but we didn't really talk about him in that class. I know he's referred to as one of the transcendental Thomists. And in that sense, he somehow would be lumped in the same category with Rahner, but I don't really get much of a sense that they had much of an influence on each other, so I don't know how much that would be. Hey, Salam, good to see you. It's been a while. Yeah, John Salsa does great work on that whole SPX question. So I don't know much about Lonergan. I just know his book Method had a lot of good insights, no pun intended, that were helpful to me. Yes, wrecking ball, that's the official definition, and by all, yeah, they just meet it. They refuse submission, period. That's the bottom line. They're disobedient. That's perpetually. I mean, and for me, the SSPX, if you go watch my video on it that I did probably a couple of years ago now, but let's just admit something. Before Francis, in his mercy to the people going to confession to those priests, this is one of the big things for me, was that they were basically giving invalid sacraments to people who thought they were valid for decades. And to me, that's the epitome of disgusting. You don't just need valid orders for confession or marriage. In both cases, you also need faculties and you need jurisdiction. So to me, those two big things for me were just enough to make me never want to darken the door of one of their chapels. So you can't call them churches. Kimberly Hall, I really can't speak to what the publishing department may or may not be doing. It's not really my place. That would be nice, though. And I also don't work for them directly, so I'm not really always in the loop on all those things. The Lubach's Ecclesiology. I think one of his best books, this is something interesting for me with the Lubach. everyone knows him for nature and grace. I personally think his best work is done in the area of Eucharistic ecclesiology. That's where I think, no, Wrecking Ball, it's no. No, and John Sauls has already covered this. This idea of the church supplies when the penitent is unaware. It refers to the community, which has to be the Catholic community being unaware. So the reality of it is, those priests don't have jurisdiction. You can't be going to their church that's not in communion with the bishop and not under his authority and without jurisdiction and just think, oh, well, it supplies it. You can't do that. That's not, especially that priest cannot be doing that. So it's a non-starter for me. So no. Yeah, we are Catholic. That's why I don't accept the schism of the SSPX, and I'm not going to apologize for that. I would not rest my hat on that. I don't think. No. If I had gone to an SSPX chapel for reconciliation and later found out it was invalid, I would go back and reconfess all mortal sins that if I had confessed any, because I would not think, oh well, it was covered under because I didn't know. No. The reality of it is, it's a grave deception to even offer those sacraments when you don't have jurisdiction. Let's see. Oh, the ecclesiology thing. So I think Dulebach's best work has been in Eucharistic ecclesiology, and unfortunately, he's just always known for the nature and grace stuff. As much as I admire his work in that area, I think his teaching about Eucharistic ecclesiology is his best. It's basically showing the connection between the church and the Eucharist, that we are the body of Christ by receiving the body of Christ. And that comes straight from 1 Corinthians. I think it's 1 Corinthians 10. I don't remember the exact verse. But it's, it has to do with the fact that we are one body because we all partake of the one loaf. And Corpus Mysticum is it's a good book. It's pretty dense. I mean, the amount of footnotes in there is pretty intense. But that's precisely what that book is about. And I think it helps us understand the connection. It's the famous tagline is that it's not just that the church makes the Eucharist, it's the Eucharist makes the church. Like, it is the sacrament of salvation. And this is why I think it's important, because again, this all goes back to the Trinity. There was a certain preconciliar tendency to emphasize the salvation of the individual soul. And obviously that's important. Absolutely it is. But salvation is not just individualistic insofar as the salvation is living a divine life, right? Well, God is a Trinity. So God is a communion of three persons. So living a divine life is to live communally. So there's a communal dimension to salvation. That's why the Creed talks about the communion of saints. So the Eucharist, and this is even Aquinas, the Eucharist doesn't just give me grace as an individual. It is the source and summit of the entire ecclesiastical life. It is the final and ultimate sacrament of initiation, theologically speaking. And so one of the effects of the Eucharist is precisely to incorporate me into the body of Christ, the church. Exactly. Catholicism, social aspects of dogma. So they're all related here, all those books. So the Eucharist affects the bond of charity. That's why it's the sacrament of charity. So the bond of charity is the life of grace lived through the grace of the Holy Spirit, which unites the church together. So the church is part, and that's why the church is necessary for salvation, because it's part of salvation. Salvation is not just something I can, and this is where, if you keep watching my lecture series on Vatican II, the church is not accidental to salvation. It's part of it. It's both a means and it's an effect that also conveys what it affects. That's why it's the sacrament of salvation, unity of all mankind. So ecclesia is the assembly of God's people. That's what church means. And so it's the Eucharist creates unity between God and man that also affects the unity of people with one another. So that's why you can't separate salvation from the church. It's a logical impossibility. Salvation is union with Christ, and union with Christ is union with the church. I thought Don Michael's interview was good on the Magisterium. It was a good interview. Yeah, Kimberly, I agree. I must have missed it. The question about, I missed that earlier. Wouldn't it have been accepted because you made a true and contrite confession? Isn't it possible an extraordinary means to receive absolution when you make a perfect contrition? Yes, my point is, so here's the problem with it. First of all, perfect act of contrition includes the intent to go to confession when possible. So it can't replace the sacrament of penance. And if you know that you went to a priest who had no faculties to absolve you, then you cannot presume that you've been absolved. Now, if someone went to an SSPX priest and didn't know, and then they walk out and get hit by a bus, I'm not saying God wouldn't, take care of them, because I'm not saying that, which might, if that's what the wrecking ball meant, I understand what you're saying there. But we are bound by the external, even if God isn't. And so I would not rely on that, is what I'm saying. I wouldn't tell people that, oh, really, I've been going to them for 5 years, that, oh, don't worry about it, it was supplied. That's what I mean. I would never tell somebody that it was supplied in those cases. I would say, no, they had no, objectively speaking, they had no jurisdiction. They don't have the faculties. Therefore, you cannot count that as valid, and therefore you should go to someone who does have faculties. So that's what I mean. Let's see, correct. Gamers, yeah, a little late. We've been going for almost 40 minutes. So regardless of who one confesses to, a perfect act of contrition would absolve sins. No, a perfect act of contrition. So here's the difference. Perfect act of contrition works if you can't get to confession. Imperfect act of contrition suffices if you do go to confession, but not outside of that, right? So a perfect act of contrition includes the intent to go to confession when possible. So you can't say, well, I made a perfect act of contrition, I don't have to go, because perfect act of contrition includes the intent to go. And it only absolves if you are not able to go. Like, say you die before you were able to go. That's the difference. Catholic guy, yes, we talked about them. I already mentioned before I made my comments earlier that until he gave them that jurisdiction for decades, they were doing it invalidly. So that's the context of our conversation. Because he had not done that when I made my video a couple of years ago. Even then, let's see. I mean, even accepting the fact that he granted them was an acknowledgement of the fact that they needed it to be granted because they didn't have it for decades, but were doing it anyway. So you can't have it both ways. Either they didn't need it or they needed it. I'm just trying to catch up here a little bit. Thanks, Rachel. Glad you enjoyed the first lecture. It's fine, Kathy. I figured you missed it. That's why I was trying to go back and explain the context of our conversation was before he did that, for decades, they were shooting blanks, if you will. It was invalid absolutions. The I-thou relationship, does it influence Ratzinger's Trinitarian theology? Yes, and in some sense you could. Wait a minute, that would be strange. I thought there was a connection with Martin Buber on that too, which is interesting because he's not obviously Martin Buber is not a Trinitarian. But yeah, the I-thou comes up repeatedly in Ratzinger's writings, and it's precisely ties back to the Trinity is the foundation, and it's the beginning and end of his theology, and Christology is the center. So that's how I describe it. Still down for a show on Donum Veritatis with Larry Chapp? Yeah, possibly. Look into that. I've been thinking about maybe asking him to come on here too at some point, because I think it's a shame. I like his channel a lot, and maybe introduce him to some people on this channel, because I really don't do much on here. I might try to do more often, but it's difficult. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff. This month is just, it's really busy. I've got a lot to get done this month. A lot of big stuff to get done. Whew. So through the first week of October or so, it's going to be intense. Let's see. Well, that's one of them, Sean. That's got to be done. That's the big thing. Well, one of the big things, but then I've got other big stuff to finish or to take care of between now and the beginning of October. But yeah, I want this thing off my desk. I'll tell you that. You know, it's always nerve-wracking because it's you want it to be really good, and you also know it can't be perfect. There's always things you could have done or said, and there's always stuff that, you know, like, oh, I could add that to that chapter. I could add this to that chapter. Oh, I could have added a whole nother chapter on another topic. And it's at some point you got to just stop. It's never just enough. Yeah, unfortunately, Cairo, I can't do that. Although I just realized it's actually Rho Chi. Um, years. So, um, yeah, this channel has to be separate from work, which is why it doesn't. This channel does not take priority. And cannot be confused because they're not the same thing. I got to keep those separate. But anyway, I do enjoy. I'm always a little bit hesitant to just do Q&As, although lately that's all I really seem to have time for. They usually go well, but I'm not one that typically just likes open-ended Q&As because I like to research things before I answer. I can talk about things, obviously, that I've studied and remembered well, but, you know, one thing studies have taught me, you forget more than you remember. I mean, I may have aced all of my coursework, but doesn't mean I could go back and take those tests today and get the same grade. So, you know, it always, the more I've studied, the more degrees I've gotten, the more I realize what I don't know and what I don't remember. Because if you ask me tomorrow to go take all of those exams again, guarantee I don't know it as much as well now as I did when I was a student, because I was studying it at that time. So, you know, degrees don't magically confer upon you the memory of all things you've studied. It's a foundation to build on, and to one of the best benefits is that it just helps remind you, helps you kind of know where to go to look into something again, or at least a starting point. Yeah, I mean, there's a place for doing it. I don't have a problem with talking about things. I think I just could not do like the Catholic Answers thing. It's just not, it's not my wheelhouse. Um, you know, I've used this analogy with people before, but I used to be a math and chemistry tutor in college. Um, you know, I took organic chemistry. I was in, you know, took calculus and all that stuff. I couldn't even tell you. I don't remember what the proof is for the Pythagorean theorem, and I learned that my freshman year of high school. So it's like, I know that it's true, and I know that in the past I used to be able to explain to you exactly why and prove it beyond doubt deductively, but it doesn't mean now I can answer every, like, the analogy in theology would be, doesn't mean I can go back and answer all of the apologetics questions now, because I don't work in that field anymore. Yeah, I know, Rachel, right? I've often wondered, you know, how awesome that would be for those matrix uploads. I also wonder what it's like to have an eidetic photographic memory. I can't even imagine that. And I would imagine that some things would be really difficult. Like, would it almost be too much? Or does it not bother you because you don't recall it unless you're intentionally called to mind? I don't know. That would be a tremendous gift to be able to just remember everything. Which is actually another, yes, if people want to support me, that'd be great. I didn't put I don't have Patreon. I avoided them because of the things. I might join them at some point. Right now I have Donor Box. I didn't put that in the description here. It's on most of my other videos though. But memory is a huge topic in Ratzinger as well. He brings it up time and again, and he gets it from Augustine, of course. And Augustine's notion of memory as the mediator between being and time. And then he'll refer to the church and her memory as that which makes her the same subject, which I don't think he connects to Locke's theory of identity, but seems to be some of that. It just is tangentially there's some connection there. Even though I think Locke's theory is faulty. So, but the notion of memory, it's just so powerful, but it's just amazing to me to think how weak our human memory really is. And when you go back and read things that you yourself have written, you don't remember half of it. Yeah, I know, Dom, right? Yeah. That's why for, Ratzinger, in part, tradition is partly the church's memory. And of course, when you go back and think about your memories, how you receive them changes every time you go back and reflect, right? So I might think about the same thing today, and then 5 years from now, think about it again, and I'm going to have a slightly different perspective, even though it's the same memory. But its significance can be changed and stuff like that. So it's, yeah, I've heard that too. I'm just calling you Rho Chi. I don't know. I mean, I could call you PX. I assumed it was connected to the Chi Rho that you see on things, but maybe it's not. I've heard, I almost said this earlier, but I didn't. Maybe if someone else knows. I've heard that people with photographic memories actually don't have the highest IQs, which is interesting. I don't know if that's actually true, but I've heard that it's not necessarily correlated with intelligence. What sort of escapism do I enjoy? Video games, TV shows? You know what? It tends to change. I don't have any particular one. I don't really have enough escapism, to be honest. I used to like certain video games when I was younger. And then throughout my adult life, I've sometimes played them for like fits and starts for a while. I used to love Call of Duty, Black Ops 2. And then at some point, I ended up doing that on my phone. I do Wordle and Quirtle pretty much daily. Right now, I'm finally reading through the Lord of the Rings series. I had picked it up many years ago, never got past Weathertop and Fellowship of the Ring. And then a month or two ago, started back up, and now I'm in the middle of the Two Towers, where they're basically on their way to Isengard after the Helm's Deep incident. So, other than reading, I missed. All right, I guess you retracted the message. I didn't see it. As far as I like movies theoretically. That used to be my big thing. I used to go to movies all the time, but I hardly ever get to go now. I don't really watch a lot of movies. I do like some TV shows, but a lot of this is going back to the past. I just don't have the opportunity to watch shows a lot anymore. So theoretically, yes. I've binged shows in the past, but not as much anymore. I actually do. I am watching this show that someone recommended to me recently. It's a Korean show about a lawyer on the autism spectrum, which for personal reasons I find fascinating. And it's actually really well done. Yeah, it's something Attorney Woo or something. I don't know. Yeah, The Amazing Attorney Woo. It's actually really well done. Since when has the clue, the wise, abandoned reason for madness, Saruman? That's funny. But I'm a big fan of the Lord of the Rings series. I've been reading that. I used to, believe it or not, if you want to talk about escapism, I used to vociferously read the Born Identity series. I read all of the original 3 by Ludlum. I've read several of the ones done by Eric von Lustbader. I don't remember where I left off, so I kind of stopped reading them because it's like I kept having to go back and try to figure out, because he wrote so many after that. And the books are so much better than the movies, even, although I do like those movies too. Okay, interesting question about, extraordinary attorney Kim Woo. No, I think it's Woo Young Woo is his name in the show. Is it Kim? I thought it was Woo Young Woo, because it's the whole front and back thing, like rotor and all that. Yeah. All right, so the Amazon show, sorry, the Rings of Power. I had not watched it except for I was doing some spring cleaning at my parents' house because I'm trying to get all my stuff out of their place that I've just stocked there over the years that I still haven't gotten out. And my dad was watching one episode of it. I don't know what episode it was. I popped in and sat and watched it for a few minutes. I was totally confused about who the characters were, the Harfoots and all that. I had to go back and research it. He fell asleep during it, and then I didn't watch it. I went last night. I finally sat down, and because I just know people have been talking about it. Some of my friends have been talking about it and debating it, and so I went back and watched the first episode, and that led me down a research hole of going, wait a minute, did this happen in the actual canon? Is this mentioned in the Silmarillion? Is this mentioned anywhere in his appendices? Or is this like, I was getting frustrated because I wanted to know what came from Tolkien and what was made up. And I didn't know. I could take guesses at some of it. Yeah, the palindrome thing. But I just found it frustrating for me because I'm like, I don't want what Amazon's selling. I want what Tolkien thought. And I was like, wait a minute, did Galadriel really, in somewhere in the canon, is there any mention of her going and searching out Sauron to the ends of the earth and all this stuff? Because it struck me as that scene, I was like, this looks like they're like in the cave in that ice area. I'm like, wait a minute, this is reminding me of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then that snow troll comes, and I'm like, well, that looks like reminds me of Planet Hoth and the creature. Like, I don't know. It was all weird to me. I was not happy with. I only saw the first episode, and I just was not. I was not impressed. Some of the visuals were okay, but I don't know. I didn't particularly enjoy it, and I found it more frustrating. And especially not knowing which aspects were based in Tolkien and which weren't. And it just led me down a rabbit hole. Yeah. I actually started reading the Silmarillion many, many years ago. I didn't get very far because I am already bad with names. And so this idea that for every single person or place that he mentions, there's like 3 or more names for the same person. And then not only that, those 3 names might be similar to the names of other people. I just couldn't keep it straight in my head. So I kind of gave up. Let's see. Do I think there should be a syllabus of errors of Vatican II? I don't know. Bad interpretations of it might be helpful, but it would also sort of be against what it was explicitly trying to avoid doing, but it might be necessary now. God bless, Don. Hope I didn't miss you. I'm just not catching up to the bottom there. It's bad, a billion down. Yeah. I gave it a chance because I had one friend who was talking about how much he loved it, the show. And then another friend who was saying it was the like worst thing ever. And so I'm watching it, and I was just like, I don't know. I personally don't care for it. I heard there's another book literally coming out like next month from Tolkien's estate that's going to put the history of the second age in one volume. That was part of my research late last night. $1 billion can very well be very wrong very quickly. I'll probably finish the Rings of Power, maybe. But I'm also just worried that it's gonna, when I do read the rest of the series, including the supplemental materials like the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, that how much is that going to color my reading of those books? That's what I'm worried about. Yeah, so I don't know. But I'll probably watch it just for the sake of finishing it. I don't know. I'm not thrilled with it. Yeah. Just to quickly go back to the Vatican II thing, one thing that I find frustrating is it's just amazing to me the things that people in the name of traditionalism will do. It's just amazing to me the things that people in the name of traditionalism will do after Vatican II that they would never think was even allowable for a person to do before Vatican II. So it's like it's just amazing to me. I mean, when before Vatican II would be okay for a Catholic layman or any clergy to publicly decry an ecumenical council? Like, I just don't, it's just unfathomable to me. And to do it so publicly and without even being trained in the area, you're giving scandal. You're literally keeping people from the church by doing that. And you're talking about missionary activity. You're impeding missionary activity. You're actually getting people to leave. Like, it's just like it's disconnect. And anyway, I don't think traditionalists actually really know what tradition is. And I think they actually have believe it or not, I think a lot of them actually have a strange modernist view of the world and even of the church. And it's just a little bit ironic. I guess there's some truth to that. I guess that could be true, although at least they, as far as I know, officially accept the council. And I've met some FSSP who do, but yeah, they probably don't talk about it much. I'm actually, I don't know. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole, but anyway, yeah. See, that's a shame if it's not taught. I do think that's kind of a problem. Oh yeah, I'm sure, Kevin. I'm sure there were. I mean, because they'll just go to any TLM that's in their area. They don't care who's doing it. Although some are told not to go to FSSP or ICKSP. So that's not entirely true, but I mean, there's no Sede Vacantis church. They got to go somewhere, I guess. It's just a shame. It really is. As a matter of fact, it's that sort of attitude that actually kept me away from the TLM for many years. I go now. We have a great, wonderful parish that's been doing it for like 20 years, and diocesan, the pastor, who obviously loves the TLM, him and his proconvicar both have doctorates of sacred theology, and the pastor did his doctorate on the Lubach, on nature and grace. And I think I haven't finished reading it. He's sent it to me, but I think he actually does so favorable to the Lubach, so that's a rarity. I think it's despicable, to answer your question, Daniel. It's pretty disgusting. Yeah, I love the TLM too. That's the main mass I go to. Huge proponent of it. But definitely not a proponent of traditionalism. Yeah, I agree, Benedictus and Selectus, and that's why I think it's important to study the council. I also think that certain questions do need to be addressed. And it's not always easy. But here's something I would also caution the average person in the pews against. If you don't understand how Dignitatis Humanae fits in, like, why are you even aware as a layman about all these past encyclicals from like the 1800s? Why is that on your radar? If you haven't even read the encyclicals of John Paul II or Benedict XVI, why? And the only answer is because you heard some quotes from it by some guy from the pulpit or online. So you're literally most likely haven't even studied those documents in their entirety, in their context. And like, it's not your job as a layman to sit there and try to put yourself in knots to judge the magisterium and see if this encyclical trumps that one, or that's not the role of the average person. And even having that mentality, to me, is an illness. The church is a body, and we all have our different parts and our roles to play. And I'm not saying that questions don't come up naturally, like if something is said, you're like, well, wait a minute, what about this thing that was also in my lifetime? But this constant lack of average person in the pews focusing on all of this stuff that they've heard from rumor mills and from just passing on taglines and things that they heard from other people who are fomenting anger. That's not how we're meant to live in the life of the church. And I just don't, it's, to me, it's disturbing, and it's not how. And I think, when Jordan Peterson, for instance, talks about being possessed by an ideology, I think this is an example of it. I also think there was another thought about that I was going to go to. But to the point about Deus Caritas Est, maybe following with Benedict XVI, absolutely. Here's one of the things that drives me nuts. They never talk about, so it'd be one thing if you're like, what, I really don't understand Dignitatis Humanae. I wonder what that's all about. No, it's, oh my gosh, I can't believe Lefebvre said this and it must be a problem. Like, have you studied it? And two, why is that your linchpin? And then three, using that as an excuse to not read anything from the magisterium since the 1960s? Do you know how many good, great documents there are that have come out since then? I mean, John Paul II had some phenomenal encyclicals, and so did Benedict XVI. Right? So the CDF has put out some phenomenal documents, and to not read any of that because de facto you just won't even look at it, that in and of itself is a schismatic attitude. So I don't, that's the stuff people need to be reading. And there's so many great documents there, but it's like you're not allowed to say anything positive about the church since 1962. It's like, if they could at least admit and talk about, not just admit that they are there, but we're not going to talk about it. Talk about the good things that the popes and the CDF have done since then. They won't even do that. Why? Because their entire shtick is we hate the church. We hate the magisterium. And so, because if you only had a handful of questions about the documents, okay, that's fine. We can deal with those. Let's have a conversation. That doesn't mean it's the only thing you should ever talk about. Like it just that's that's not a healthy life of faith. Yeah, I think anyway, I agree with you, Daniel. Hence why I do a lot of work on Vatican II. And that's the other thing that just drives me nuts is how the documents will be presented in this sort of I literally liken it to the National Enquirer in how it's presented. It's like a soap opera when people twist what the council's saying in insane ways. And I'm like, how do you not know what you're doing there? I find it really hard to believe that some of these people don't know exactly what they're doing. And I know that I can't prove that, and that's why I'm not going to name names, but I'm like, how can how can you not know that this is not an accurate portrayal of what's being said? And all I know is that faith in the church includes the fact that, okay, you know what? If this tier 3 level of magisterial teaching is in error, I'm not going to be damned for accepting it, but I could very well be damned for refusing religious submission of intellect and will. So, Pascal's wager that one. In other words, no one's going to be damned for accepting Vatican II, but the other way, Yeah. All right. Any other random questions? Oh, thanks, Chivley. I'm glad you understand what I'm saying at least. So the going back to the question about what I like to do for fun, I used to be an avid watcher and player of soccer. Unfortunately, I've only been able to watch like one or two games in the past couple of years, but I used to love to watch it regularly. And I don't have cable, so it's really hard to even watch and just time. James, yeah. So, but yeah, I'm a huge soccer fan. Wish I could watch more of it. I always thought it was funny. Like I remember growing up and like dads and stuff always watch sports on weekends. Like watch like football games Saturday and Sunday. And then I'm like, where's that? I don't have time to do that. I don't. I know that used to be a thing, but golly, I don't get that opportunity. Um, I really wouldn't want to do it all weekend, but just game here or there would be nice. I do like college football. Uh, Sojourn on. You'd like to see a theory of biblical inspiration that incorporates modern textual and historical criticism. Are interpolations also inspired? I think that's a very difficult question because I'm pretty sure that even St. Augustine said that if something seemed to be problematic in his reading of a biblical text, that one possibility for the difficulty could actually be a transcription error on the part of the scribe. I also think that would be a question for a really good biblical scholar, because I think part of the difficulty is all of our editions any translation of the Bible you're going to have, decisions have to be made about which texts you're going to give priority to. But I also think that's a reason that we have to be our approach to scripture needs to be different than some other religions. I'll put it that way. Like it's not the end all be all. But obviously I think Ratzinger's view of interpretation is really good. But as far as, interpolations also inspired, I don't know. I personally, having studied a lot of historical critical method stuff, I remember when I first was shown it, I was like, oh, this is kind of good. That makes sense. And I still think some of it's very valid. But then I watched actual applications of it. And so like with Ratzinger, it was more like, okay, in theory, some of this stuff could be good. But then in practice, you see how crazy it gets and how it's really being used with other presuppositions that aren't true. I was never very much convinced by a lot of the textual criticism stuff. This couldn't have written by so-and-so because, it doesn't sound like this other letter that we know he wrote. And I was like, you could read 2 of my papers when I was an undergrad. They wouldn't sound anything alike. Like, I know that you can sometimes tell if something might have been written by the same person because of similarities. But even in a matter of like a 4-year period, my method of expression would change drastically. So a lot of those arguments, I think, on textual criticism, I think can just fall flat. I'm not always very convinced by them. Some of them are more convincing than others. But that's why biblical scholarship is a whole different field in itself, because if you want to get into all those sorts of nitty-gritty stuff, that really does require a whole deal of specialization and many years of study. That's completely different and specialized. So what do we might say God is the author of the Bible? Basically, that he's the primary author of the Bible means that he is the one that inspired the human authors who are true authors, and he used them and their faculties to write things down. But that he is the one that inspired it so that they would write down what he wanted them to write down. But it's not a dictation model. That's where it gets difficult. It's not the Quran, the way that the Muslims view the Quran, where it literally is like all they did was dictate it, or they're court stenographers and they just typed what they heard. It's different. He uses them as true instruments. So he's writing through them, but they are actually involved in the process. It's not just like the angel Gabriel handing the books down. So it's a completely different understanding of biblical inspiration than what you get in other notions. All right, Star Wars or Star Trek fan. I used to like Next Generation. I tried to go back and watch the original series, wasn't a fan of it. Didn't really follow Star Trek much. More so Star Wars, but I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan because I don't know that much about it. As far as IR review or ear review, Vatican II does not teach material limited inerrancy. That's a misunderstanding. The Relatio to the Council Fathers explicitly rejects that view. It says that when it uses the phrase "for the sake of our salvation," it is not referring to a material limitation. It is referring to the formal principle, which is the reason that God revealed in Scripture in its totality. So now, when you say not be historical, it's a different question. Then you have to ask which parts, because it does recognize different literary genres. Not everything is to be read the same way. Not every part of the scripture is the same. Okay? So, just the same way that even in the Gospels, like Jesus talking to the woman at the well is different than Jesus telling the parable of the prodigal son, which may not refer to an actual prodigal son, or when he uses, examples of like mustard seeds and finding a treasure buried in a field. Like there are many different modes of expression in the scriptures which means not everything in scripture is necessarily meant to be an historical record. And so that's really, you have to determine what sort of genre you're dealing with in a given instance. I really could not tell you what presuppositionalism means because I barely even heard of that term myself. So I've heard a couple people describe it in different ways. So I still have questions myself about what they actually mean. Thanks for the congrats, your review, or IR review. I have seen, talking about Jeremiah Bannister and presuppositionalism, I know that a lot of things he says remind me of things I've read in Bonaventure and Ratzinger. But I don't really know officially what presuppositionalism is. I've also heard people present it in certain ways. They go, I don't know if that means that. So I would have questions about what it actually means. So James Reich, I want the Mass to be done right too. So I'm with you on that. You might find the arguments of Vatican II boring. Unfortunately, they're also very necessary for others. So good. Maybe you don't need to look into those. Maybe you understand it well enough for you, but there's a lot of people that have a lot of misperceptions about it, and so I think they do need to be addressed. But I agree. I think the liturgy and doing it right is one of the biggest issues facing the church. Yeah, well, technically it might have been many months. I did do a different live stream a couple weeks ago, but I didn't keep it up, and I don't even know if I'll keep this up after the live stream. So we'll see. But I did do one, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, I think. Yeah, the liturgy is definitely important, and that's one thing on the ground I think most people can agree on. It's not done well in many places. It's an interesting. I'm just sorry, Daniel Brazinovich. I'm reading your comment. People understanding what the church is for. I think you're right, but it also strikes me that that phrasing is interesting because we do live in a very utilitarian society. Although I'm a big fan of teleology, so how do you parse that out? I think people have a misunderstanding what the church is, and the fact that it's actually a gift, and it's more than we deserve, and yet we spend so much time nitpicking about it. And I'm not saying there aren't real reasons to be upset. I mean, obviously are, but it's still we can focus on the negative so much that we forget the joyousness. And that's one thing I've noticed, like even amongst some of my friends over the years who are very similar in thought as I am. It used to just strike me how often conversations always stemmed around what was wrong with other factions of people in the church or people outside the church or different views. Like, why there's it seemed to me that we would probably be better off doing more reflection, positive reflection on the mysteries of faith and how great they are, instead of how this other people are dumb and stupid or malicious. Like, and I think that's one thing I like about Ratzinger. He deals with a lot of the problems and the enemies, but he also presents the faith in a way that's beautiful. That's what I think and this is what de Lubac and von Balthasar, all those guys were talking about. It's like, can we talk about the beauty of the faith? Why does everything have to be about what's like negative? I mean, even if you're dealing with the negative or difficult passages, it's like even there's a beauty even to that. But why is, the faith itself is beautiful, it's presented. And let's think about it. Like the beauty of the incarnation. I mean, it's just you can really do some great meditations on what that really means. I don't know that we do enough of that. It's like we'll do that to get people into RCIA, and then afterwards it's all like, oh well, now we're going to tell you the real story. Apparently, there's just so much beauty to the faith, and I think we need to focus on that. It's this is something that Ratzinger talked about when he was meeting with some colleagues, and one of them was making a comment about how he thought we should be grateful for all these people who are inculpably ignorant, because otherwise, if they came to know, they'd have this burden of faith on them. And he was like, "Why do you see faith as a burden? Like you're making knowledge of the truth somehow." He said the guy was basically making it out that somehow ignorance was more salvific and more of a gift from God than knowledge of the truth and faith was. And he was like, that's just absurd. Like, it's not just this burden, it's this beautiful treasure. So anyway, any other thoughts, questions, comments? What are some of y'all's favorite areas of theology to study or, look into? Yeah, that's always a good idea, Daniel. Yeah. Hmm. All right. Well, unless there's any more comments or questions, I guess we can wrap it up. We've been this for about an hour and a half. But I do just encourage everyone, if you haven't already, click the link in the description and check out that first lecture out of the description and check out that first lecture out of 6. Ethics, does that have to do with theology? Yes, although it relates to moral theology. Yeah, typology in sacred scripture is one of the best things. Yes, ethics does have to do with theology. If you haven't read Veritatis Splendor, I highly recommend it. It's a great encyclical on, it's called The Splendor of Truth in English. John Paul II's encyclical on moral theology. It's excellent. And again, that's part of the book I'm doing, and almost any course I ever teach. I try to talk about the relationship between the different areas of theology and how they relate. And so, for instance, in my current book, it's chapter 9 out of 10 is ethics or moral theology. It relates directly to everything else, but I tie it in with eschatology. Because in some sense, ethics or moral theology is the living out of the heaven on earth. And this is something, that's why I think metaphysics and ontology are so important. Heaven is not primarily a place we go, it's what we become. Heaven could not be heaven if there were any imperfections, which means we have to be morally perfect in order for heaven to be heaven. Like, it's just a blanket statement. Otherwise, as soon as we start doing anything in heaven, it's no longer heaven. I'm not going to reveal the title yet because I don't know if we've officially settled on one, but it's on the theology of Benedict XVI, his life and thought. So that's what it's on. You're welcome, Sean. Anyway, any other comments, questions, suggestions, or announcements? All right. Well, thank you all for being on here. Enjoyed it. Yeah, I do too. He's phenomenal. So I'm writing the book on him. I've been wanting to write this book for probably 15 years. Do I like Dostoevsky? In theory. I've started reading some of his books. I never actually finished them, unfortunately. I like what I've heard about them, but I haven't actually read them cover to cover. Anyway, yeah, I'm hoping to finish this book soon, and then just hope the editing process goes smoothly and that it's in good enough shape to, get out there eventually. Oh, eschatology. I think I see what you did there, gamers. You're probably referring back to comments I've made in the past. Anyway, thank you all for being on here, and yeah, check out that series on the Word on Fire Institute YouTube channel, which is distinct from my own, completely separate. But check that link out in the description, and let me know what you think. And again, every Tuesday, a new lesson or lecture. It's a mini series of lectures, is what we're calling it. So the next lecture will be, yeah, gamers, that's what I thought. Will be next Tuesday. So that's when the next one will come out. And really, the whole series does need to be understood as a whole. So I'm really hoping people will watch every single episode, because they intentionally connect to one another. So it's like you almost need to get through all of them to understand any one of them. And it's one of those things where you just hope people don't drop off. So anyway, take care, y'all, and God bless.